On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta, Indonesia. 12 minutes later, it fell into the Java Sea. 189 people were killed. Boeing's initial response was to say the pilots had not followed the correct procedure. 5 months later, on March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa. 6 minutes after takeoff, it fell from the sky. 157 more people were killed. Boeing gave the same explanation. The pilots had not followed the correct procedure. There was one problem with that explanation. The pilots had followed the correct procedure. A Boeing test pilot had written, 18 months before the first crash, that the 737 MAX was designed by clowns, supervised by monkeys. 346 people are dead. No Boeing executive has gone to prison. This is their story. Welcome back to Guilty and Free. What you are about to hear is not a story about a mechanical failure. It is not a story about pilot error. It is a story about a company that was in a race. A race against Airbus, against its own production schedule, against a deadline it had set itself. And that in running that race, made decisions it knew were dangerous, concealed those decisions from regulators, and when 2 planes fell from the sky, attempted to blame the people who had been given no chance to save themselves. To understand why 346 people died, you need to understand one thing about the aviation business in 2011. Airbus had just launched a new plane, the A320neo. It had more fuel-efficient engines. It was cheaper to operate, and American Airlines were buying it fast. American Airlines, traditionally a Boeing customer, placed an order for 260 A320neos before Boeing had even announced a competing aircraft. Boeing faced a choice: design a new plane from scratch, which would take 10 years and cost billions, or modify the existing 737, a plane that had been flying since 1967, to fit larger, more fuel-efficient engines. They chose modification. The new plane was called the 737 MAX. The problem was the engine. The new engines were larger than the old ones. They couldn't fit in the same position under the wing. So Boeing moved them forward and upward. This changed the aerodynamics of the plane. Specifically, in certain flight conditions, the new engine position caused the nose to pitch upward, to rise, in a way the pilots might not expect and might not be able to counteract manually. Boeing's solution was a software system, MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. MCAS would automatically push the nose down if it detected the angle of attack was too steep. In theory, a safety feature. In practice, a system that, if it received faulty sensor data, would push the nose down repeatedly and forcefully. And pilots who had never been trained on it would have no way of knowing what was fighting them for control of their plane. Boeing did not tell pilots about MCAS. Not in the flight manuals, not in training, not in the official documentation provided to airlines. This was not an oversight. It was a decision. Internal Boeing documents obtained by the House Transportation Committee show Boeing engineers discussing whether MCAS should be included in pilot training materials. The concern was not safety. The concern was cost. If MCAS required additional training, specifically simulator training, airlines would face additional expenses. Boeing had sold the 737 MAX to airlines partly on the promise that it would not require expensive simulator retraining for pilots already certified on the 737. That promise had financial value. It was part of the commercial proposition. Adding MCAS to the training requirements would break the promise. So MCAS was removed from the training materials. Pilots who flew the 737 MAX were not told the system existed. They were not told what it did. They were not told how to disable it if it malfunctioned. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, approved this. Or more precisely, the FAA did not catch it. Because by 2018, the FAA had delegated a significant portion of Boeing's own safety certification back to Boeing itself. Boeing employees were certifying Boeing's own plane. The regulator that was supposed to catch what Boeing was hiding was staffed, in part, by the people who worked for Boeing. On October 22, 2018, 1 week before Lion Air Flight 610 crashed. Investigators from Boeing and the FAA were exchanging internal messages about the 737 MAX. It was in this exchange that a Boeing test pilot named Mark Faulkner was found to have written the following: "This airplane is designed by clowns, who are in turn supervised by monkeys." This message had been sent in 2017, 18 months before the first crash, and it had not been shown to the FAA. Faulkner had been Boeing's chief technical pilot for the 737 MAX. He was one of the primary people responsible for representing the aircraft to regulators. In another message, he wrote that MCAS was running rampant in the simulator, meaning the system was activating when it should not have been, behaving unpredictably in exactly the manner that would later cause 2 crashes. He described trying to convince the FAA that the system was benign and did not need to be in the pilot training materials. "I basically lied to the regulators," he wrote, in a message sent to a colleague. That message was also not provided to the FAA during the initial investigation. It was discovered later, after the second crash. Mark Faulkner was charged with fraud by the Department of Justice in 2021. In 2022, a jury acquitted him. The jury found that the government had not proven that Faulkner's omissions had directly caused the crashes. He walked out of the courtroom a free man. Lion Air. Flight 610. The crew of that flight had, in the previous minutes, been fighting an MCAS system that was receiving faulty data from a malfunctioning angle of attack sensor. MCAS was repeatedly pushing the nose down. The pilots were fighting to keep it up. They did not know MCAS existed. They did not know what was fighting them. Flight data recorders recovered from the Java Sea showed the pilots responding correctly to what they could observe, but having no way to diagnose the system they could not see. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. The crew of that flight had been informed about MCAS between the two crashes. Boeing had issued a bulletin after the Lion Air crash, acknowledging MCAS's role. But the crew had no simulator training. They had a bulletin. They had 40 seconds. In 40 seconds, with a malfunctioning sensor and an MCAS system pushing the nose down at a rate of 2.5 degrees per second, the crew of Flight 302 did everything the bulletin told them to do. MCAS overpowered them anyway. The nose went down. The plane entered a dive from which it could not recover. 157 people died. The second crash happened because Boeing had known what caused the first and had responded with a bulletin instead of a grounding. After the second crash, the 737 MAX was grounded worldwide. 20 months later, it was recertified. In 2021, Boeing entered a deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice. The charge: a single count of conspiracy to defraud the United States by deceiving the FAA. The fine: $2.5 billion. Of that $2.5 billion, $1.77 billion was compensation to airlines, not to victims' families. $500 million was established as a fund for the victims' families. $244 million was a criminal fine. Not one Boeing executive was charged. Not one Boeing executive has served a single day in prison for the deaths of 346 people. In January 2024, the Department of Justice announced it would seek to prosecute Boeing for violating the terms of the 2021 Deferred Prosecution Agreement. Boeing's response was to negotiate. In July 2024, the DOJ proposed a plea deal. Boeing would plead guilty to a single fraud charge, pay an additional $243.6 million, and serve 3 years of probation. The families of the 346 victims called it a sweetheart deal. They asked a federal judge to reject it. The judge rejected the deal in December 2024, ruling that the proposed independent compliance monitor was not sufficiently independent of Boeing. The case continues. Boeing's market capitalization at the time of the first crash was approximately $200 billion. This is the part of the story that did not make the settlement negotiations. In 2024, 2 Boeing whistleblowers, who had raised safety concerns about the company, died within weeks of each other. John Barnett was a Boeing quality control manager who had worked for the company for 32 years. He had raised concerns about the production quality of Boeing aircraft at the company's Charleston plant. Concerns that included allegations that defective parts were being fitted to aircraft and the documentation was being falsified. He had been fighting a whistleblower retaliation lawsuit against Boeing for years. In March 2024, he was found dead in a truck outside a hotel in Charleston, South Carolina. He had been due to resume his deposition in the lawsuit against Boeing the following morning. The coroner ruled his death a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His lawyers said he had given no indication he was contemplating suicide. He was 62 years old. 6 weeks later, a second Boeing whistleblower, Josh Dean, a former quality auditor at Boeing supplier Spirit Aerosystems, died after a sudden and severe infection. He was 45 years old. He had raised concerns about safety violations at the Spirit Aerosystems plant that produced fuselages for Boeing aircraft. 2 whistleblowers, 2 deaths, 6 weeks apart. Both had raised concerns about Boeing's manufacturing safety. Both died before fully completing their legal proceedings. The authorities investigated. They found no evidence of foul play in either case. That is the official conclusion. It is the only conclusion that exists. Boeing is not an outlier. It is an example of what happens when a company becomes too important to regulate properly, when the regulator delegates certification back to the company itself, when the fine for killing 346 people is smaller than the quarterly profit, when the executive who oversaw the program receives a compensation package, and the engineers who flagged the problem are the ones who end up in court. The FAA delegated Boeing's safety certification to Boeing. Boeing's engineers warned about MCAS and were overruled. Boeing's test pilot wrote that the plane was designed by clowns. Boeing's lawyers negotiated a deal that the families of the dead called a sweetheart arrangement. 2 whistleblowers died. The case continues, and the 737 MAX is flying again. Right now. Today. On routes across America and Europe. This is Guilty and Free. 346 people dead. 1 fraud charge. $2.5 billion. No executive imprisoned. 2 whistleblowers dead before testifying. They got away with it. Subscribe. New video every week. The next video in this series goes to Bhopal, India in 1984, where 20,000 people died in a single night, and the American CEO flew home and was never extradited. They got away with it. All of them.